Welcome to the U3 Media Podcast, where our mission is to unite the world through coffee, connecting you to the farmers and coffee entrepreneurs through the stories they share. I'm Christy Ross, and joining us today is Jim Brady. He's a highly respected specialty coffee professional and educator. He's been a cafe owner, retail, and wholesale coffee roaster. He was a longtime master roaster for Keurig and is now with Starbucks. Welcome, Jim. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Christy. It's great to be here.
Really glad you could join us. We have a lot to cover. So we're going to start at the beginning. Give us a little background on how you got your start in coffee.
Well, I was a session musician and I played live a lot, and I grew up in New Jersey and we had blue laws. So there was really no place to go after you'd finish a show or anything. And so we went to coffee houses, and I grew up on the Jersey Shore and, pretty much learned about coffee by going to a place called the Inkwell. And they were open until, 4 or 5 in the morning, and you could go and have different coffees from around the world. And that was my first experience with espresso and, just different drinks that way. And that's how I first learned of coffee and had a great passion for it from, maybe 15 years on.
Wow. So is Inkwell still there?
No, actually, surprisingly and sadly, the building was demolished about a year and a half ago. It suffered after Sandy, and they tried to kind of keep things going. But it really was an old building. But it was a landmark in Long Branch, New Jersey, kind of a famous place as well. There's a lot of folklore around the Inkwell.
I know when we spoke before, there was a little interesting tidbit about the Inkwell and a phrase. Can you share that?
The Springsteen story, yeah. So at the Inkwell, it was kind of a different coffee shop than what I would expect, what you'd see today. When you'd walk into the Inkwell, you'd buy a mug, and you pretty much could have coffee. It was kind of like the bottomless cup was their deal. And when you walked in, there was a doorway, and there was kind of a rainbow over the doorway, and it said, "Drink till you get your fill." And so living in New Jersey and growing up there, you'd have this, the people that were there. And Bruce Springsteen was a local hero, and, and he was also the guy that was always there. Super nice man, and you would see and listen to Glory Days, and in the third chorus or third verse of Glory Days, he makes a comment and says, "Think I'm going down to the well tonight. I'm going to drink till I get my fill." The rest of the world, that's just a metaphor. But we knew what that meant because, you'd go and there was a good likelihood if Bruce wasn't on the road, 11 o'clock at night, you're going to find him at the Inkwell.
What a cool connection.
So,
that is a cool
but
connection.
that's where I learned the passion for coffee, is that kind of an artist environment where you were free to, discuss things and you learn that concept in a community like that where you find your convictions, you find what you believe in. And the only way you can really believe what you do is you hear opposing points of view articulated in a respectful manner, and you talk about it, you debate, and you kind of have banter back and forth, and that's what leads to creativity. And coffee is creativity.
It
is an art.
It is, for sure. So you owned your own cafe though too, and roastery.
Yep.
So I'm curious, and especially as we are building our own right now, like what would you say was the hardest thing about getting the company off the ground?
Trying to find a balance of wanting to bring a high-end product to your community, to your clientele. At school, in undergrad, they taught us the fundamentals of public relations was do a good job and tell people about it. And I would always balance those two. So doing a good job, when I first took over the large cafe, or the one I had for many years, I had taken over from a gentleman, wonderful guy. The original owners, myself, and the interim owner all shared an attorney. So that's kind of how we got together. And he had difficulty. He was a young guy and had difficulty, with the business end of it. But he had bad business dealings and didn't really pay a lot of bills to a lot of the roasters around the area.
That's problematic.
Yeah, it is. So I wound up having to roast to be able to produce a great product for my clientele, because I had clients that would come in and they never knew if, is there going to be good coffee today, or had he gone somewhere else to get it? And I wanted that consistency. I wanted to be the thing that people counted on. And that's what built, a bagged business, and what built a wholesale business, and what led to the remainder of my career thus far. So, finding a way to do a good job and tell people about it. I put my roaster, when I first started roasting coffee, I put it right out in the middle of the floor. So you would sit 8 feet from my roaster. So you were
that's
not.
It's a showpiece, but
isn't
it? Were you worried it was like a hazard, like
No.
if there was a fire or something?
No. I was very fortunate. One of my very dearest friends in the world is a gentleman named Bucky Fry. Bucky was the chief of plan review and inspections in the city of Winston-Salem. So I couldn't do anything without it being way above code, because Bucky was going to be there. And so we made sure it was safe. We took the distance of what was required, and we went a little bit further than that so that people felt comfortable. And it was amazing how many people would gather around just to watch you roast.
Yeah. It's it is interesting to watch. And especially if you don't know, about the process, it gives you a deeper appreciation for sure, like as a customer.
Today, being a Starbucks roaster, I've had the opportunity to roast in some of our roastery reserves. I've been in the roastery reserve in Seattle and in Chicago. And I've had the opportunity to roast there and interact with the customers that come in. And it's great, because that's, you and I talked about this the other day about the Civets quote. It's like everything we do in the industry is design. Our commodity has one purpose, and that is to provide pleasure to the consumer. That's the whole reason we do this, is to make people happy. And that's our end game. So, whether it was sitting around, a 7 kilo Diedrich from another era, with customers in Winston-Salem, or whether I'm in Seattle at the epicenter of all coffee as part of the largest coffee company in the country, I'm still talking to people about it.
But I think that's really important, is listening to what the customer wants, and having that interaction, that open dialogue is really important to make sure you're delivering that fabulous joy that, those customers are looking for. So,
and honestly, that's part of what, one of the nice things being in the community today is, it's nice to talk to people about, an experiment we do in teaching in the SCA that we've always done is you roast 3 coffees, 3 very different coffees from the belt. You take a Guada, a Central American, you take an African, and you take an Indonesian, roast them identically, have people taste them. You're going to have a group of people, and some are going to say, oh, I like the Central, or I like the Indo. And if you have them, you do the whole acidity thing, and you go from the really heavy duty Indo through the whiny and fullness of the Kenyan, and then you get over to your bright balance, Central. Then you mix them together, and those 3 coffees put together, you're going to find something that everybody's going to like, just a little piece of it. And that's why blends work so well. So that's the kind of cool stuff that when you do it, whether you're with customers in a small town or on a global scale, everybody digs that.
Yeah, I think actually that is really important, because the blend is finding that right recipe, right? So I want to ask about your business and how it morphed from retail into wholesale. Like, why did you make that shift? Selling to other cafes and restaurants and we'll call it big box retail, right? Like, why the shift?
I loved roasting coffee. If you would have told me when I started roasting coffee that 5 years after I started roasting, I would close my retail cafe because it was getting in the way, I would have laughed at you. I had a wonderful accountant at the time, and I had a really big place. It was a city block wide, and we sat 100 people, and we had live music like 4 nights a week. And it was a great, fun place to be. And my accountant came in and she said, do you read the reports that I give you? And I was like, well, yeah. She said, they're in color. And I said, well, yeah. And she said, all right, well, think of it this way. 90% of your revenue comes from selling bulk roasted coffee. And of that, about 90% of it is, wholesale. It's what you're selling to the restaurants, to the other business, to the other coffee shops. And about 95% of your overhead comes from this 100-seat hobby you have. I will say this, and it's a point that's so important, especially in our industry. We have colleagues here. There's not a room for the competitor attitude when you're a roaster. I would sell as a roaster retailer. I sold to other coffee shops in my town because they wanted a certain product or they realized that their clients, I had a great espresso and a lot of other, little cafes in our town didn't. And so, but they, customers really dug their vibe, or it was a little bookstore or whatever it was. And they'd buy some of my coffee because they wanted to be able to offer that same kind of quality to their customers and not have them come over to me. So, I always say everybody runs out of cups at 4:45 on a Friday afternoon.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. No, and I think one thing I don't know if you know about me, Jim, but my career decades ago, I started as an accountant. So I love that there is an appreciation for accounting. That's a good one.
She was great.
So I want to continue down your career path because you then made a move into industrial roasting as a career path. So what influenced that move?
So I was involved with the early parts of the Roasters Guild and especially Coffee Association of America. And that exposed me to a lot of people. I met other small roaster retailers. I met large roaster retailers. I met industrial roasters. At the time, I thought, oh my God, they're roasting 30,000 pounds of coffee a day. I hadn't done 30,000 in a year. And so you get this mix, and I'm a ravenous reader. I just have this craze for reading, and I like to learn. And so anybody that could give me something about roasting, about coffee, I took it in. I have such a great appreciation for, the roasters and the people in the industry who came before us. So for me, I had that relationship and that response, and people would call. I was very early. I was a really early volunteer. I got involved, and I would volunteer for a class to hear the lecture 3 times, not because I wanted a certificate or anything, but I wanted the knowledge. And so I had this large growing wholesale business from a small perspective, and we had moved just outside of Asheville, and HR person, a headhunter for Green Mountain Coffee called. And she said, would you be interested in having a conversation about coming to work for a national coffee company? And I said, sure, I'll talk to anybody. And they made a really nice offer. It was a stable, generous salary, and benefits and a good community. And I went there and I walked around and I met the people It wasn't just meeting the HR team. They left me in the break room and I talked to people, and there were people who were happy. And that was kind of the community I wanted. It was the vibe. And
that's, you don't always find that in larger organizations, right? I mean, it's something that seems to be rare, the larger the company becomes.
Yeah.
So you've been roasting like on a macro scale at 3 of the largest roasting companies in the US for the last 2 decades or so, right?
Yes.
Yet you're like sort of your love of coffee, you do focus like on that, I'll call it micro scale, right? Like how do you bring that passion, for the industry? How do you bring that aspect of that micro coffee view to the masses, to the mass consumers?
It's about the coffee. It's always about the coffee. Coffee doesn't change in that sense. It is static. The knowledge we have for coffee in 1935, Euchre's, this is a first edition. This is, all about coffee by Euchre's.
Oh, wow. So wait, would that be the book you recommend everybody read?
Everybody should read this book.
Okay.
And Mr. Euchre's was long gone before I stepped foot on the earth. So it wasn't like I'm getting a benefit from him. But here's the deal. This book is almost 100 years old, and what we know and the knowledge we have about this hasn't changed. We know more because we have better tools, better testing equipment, we have better chemistry, we have better everything. But the principles that are in this book still apply today. So I was able to do that. I was able to go and take that information, and I know that coffee is going to taste the same. Well, when I teach at something like Retreat or at Expo, or with one of the great educators we have here, Fire Dancer or anybody, I go to a San Franciscan roaster because it's a manual machine where I have a lever that adjusts my gas flow, so I have an environmental burner underneath the roaster, and I have a gate for the airflow. And the principles that work with a manual machine roasting a kilo at a time are the same principles that work with 360 kilos. And I can say that because I do both. So it isn't a matter of the equipment being your limitation. It's what you put into it.
The technology advancements then in coffee roasting seems to have catapulted over the last 3 decades.
Oh, yeah.
How would you say that sort of shaped the industry, or really transformed it? Was it just a lower barrier to entry then, with all the technology advancements, to allow people to come in that didn't have the years of craft experience of roasting, or how would you say the industry transformed because of the technology?
The technology was driven by demand. So when I started, and I was trying to pull it off my wall here, but I have too many things up with it. But when I started, you started with a stopwatch, and that's what you had. And I still today have a stopwatch that granted, I don't carry it into the plant when I'm roasting, but I have a stopwatch.
Oh my God. I love that.
Okay.
How old is that? What year is that from?
Old. I'll give you an idea. Ernesto Ely left us decades ago, and those 3 silver coffee beans were a gift from him.
Wow. Very cool.
But the idea being is that you would use a stopwatch to measure time. You have not even a thermocouple. You could just have an analog dial, and that measures your heat. If you have a piece of paper and you can graph one on one plot and one on the other, and that was what the Roasters Guild, and that's what the SCAA did, was we taught that principle. So if I'm doing that with a blank piece of paper, if you find a computer program that can plot that, you're doing the same work. It's the exact same thing. If you walk from here to the West Coast, you can manually, digitally, or by your feet, walk across the country. If you get in an automobile, you can make the same trip, or if you fly, you make the same trip. You're still getting to the same place. It's just the mechanism you use. And so coffee's been the same thing. We developed thermocouples, we developed profile roasters, and PLCs, programmable logic controllers, that open and close the gates for how much heat, how much gas is in there, what the airflow is doing. That's what we drove as an industry. And that's how and I'm sure this, as the technology develops and goes more and more in depth with that, we're going to continue to advance.
Yeah.
We have touch screens now.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think you make a good point, is just that through the education process, sometimes actually removing the technology so people deeply understand what the technology is doing is important. So I'm going to shift to an important point about you and your contribution around education. So you actually started or actually served in a number of volunteer roles for the roasting community. But I want to point out that you've been a member, or rather I'll go further to say you've been an integral part of the Roasters Guild since inception. And you were one of the original volunteers and instructors that helped that evolve. Can you share that with our audience?
Well, as a cafe owner, it was challenging financially. You're not everyone is fortunate to have, a line out the door around the block every day. So I would measure things in how many cups of coffee or how many pounds of coffee did I have to sell to afford it. And so when I first started roasting, or was interested in roasting, and it had just little things like, I'd done experiments with hot air poppers and trying to learn stuff. the internet was fairly new. Al Gore had just given us the internet. So, we were trying to learn things. And I went to an SCA expo. I was thinking about this the other day, whether it was in Miami or somewhere. And they were forming the Roasters Guild. And I thought that was interesting. And I was thinking, well, it was a cost to join. And I had to consider to myself, okay, so this many hundreds of dollars, how many cups of coffee do I have to sell? What will be my return? And I met a gentleman named Spencer Turr. He's the principal now at Coffee Enterprises in Vermont. Wonderful man. Great. You should interview him. He was standing outside of it and walking in, and he asked what I was doing there. And I said, well, I'm hoping there's paperwork or something when you're done with the meeting. And he brought me in the room, and he said, guys, this is why we do this. This is a small roaster who's trying to learn about our craft. This is why we do this. And it introduced me to some other people who were instructors. And again, it was expensive, $250, $300 for a class. But I could volunteer for the class. I could help make coffee. I could help brew. I could help porter, clean up, set the table, turn it back over. But I got to hear the lecture 3 times in a day. It was about the knowledge. And I've always looked at that. And even today, whenever I instruct, I make sure the ones who are volunteers, I see their story. I talk to them. I make sure. So if they are doing that same thing, I make sure they walk out with a full set of paperwork. I make sure they have their questions answered, because you have to give it back. Anything that was freely given to me, I have to give back. That's the way this works.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's like this cycle of life, right? The circle of life of just passing on your knowledge, your experiences, and hoping to help somebody else, lift them up.
And that's been the greatest privilege of my career is helping other roasters learn the process.
Yeah. So was Spencer one of your mentors then? Is that right? So
Absolutely.
What would you say is the best piece of advice that Spencer ever gave you?
Listen.
Yep.
And don't be afraid to ask questions. Listen. And he developed our standards. He was part of our standards committee that we had for many, many years. So everything we built off of that. So you had to have a standard to apply to build education on.
Mm-hmm.
What is the standard for, measurement? What is our standard for weight? What is our standard for brewing, our gram process, whatever it is. And that was where his passion was. And that just completely fed everybody else. And he's a great roaster too. He doesn't ever give himself that credit. But several years ago, probably near the end of the Roasters Guild, before we evolved into the Coffee Roasters Guild, one of our Roaster Guild retreats, we had a mentor. That was the whole concept of the event, was mentorship. And we took 5, and Spencer was one of them, 5 key pivotal people through the Roasters Guild history. And we made them available to all of the attendees so that they could come up. And you had new people who were just buying the roaster, going up to Marty Curtis, who builds these massive things and is one of the original Q graders and just a super and really involved guy. And you saw him with a group of brand new roasters, and that impacted their lives.
Yeah.
I mean, their careers.
What a great way to do that. I like the structure of that particular event around the mentorship, because it's hard. You can do one-on-one, but to try to do it a little bit more on a macro scale in the way you did it, that's really interesting. Well, you also you teach in a number of ways, but one way that I thought was really wonderful, the way you shared your wealth of knowledge about roasting with the community. I saw the recent article that you wrote on Roast Magazine, which is a prime example, called Taking It Back to the Basics, the skills and knowledge required for the production roasting at any scale. And just a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned something about an air popper. So talk about the differences of call it do-it-yourself at home roasting, like with an air popper, versus mass production.
The chemistry doesn't change. When you apply heat or energy, it's Boyle's law. When you apply energy to a sealed system, the pressure increases. And, the concept of where water boils and the idea of temperature and where you have endo and exothermic reactions on a coffee bean, those principles don't change. So if you're applying heat with an air popper, just your popcorn popper, you're going to at some point get to a temperature, maybe a little quicker or not as controlled, where you'll get to 370 degrees and you'll start seeing the endothermic reaction of the coffee expanding, of the steam leaving the coffee and that pop. If you do the same thing on a $2 million roasting system, it's going to apply the same kind of heat in the same way, and you're going to get the same reaction. So the goal of that article was to try to just demystify the equipment as being the all-important aspect and making it so that people felt comfortable with the concepts. You learn the concepts, the books, you can read about it, you can learn about it, and you can do it with a stopwatch. You can learn how it works and you can replicate it.
Yeah, I think everybody should read that article. Was there an aha moment that you had in your career where you realized that you could truly call yourself an expert? Like, was there something that you're like, I've mastered that and now I am an expert? I mean, I know you're not like that. You're far more humble, but you absolutely have done that. Like, but was there something in your head, like something that flipped the switch for you?
Well, I'll let you know when I feel like I'm a master. I've been very fortunate that a lot of people have shared their experience with me. And I'm very grateful that I had an education that allowed me to appreciate that and take that in. Seeing students come back to you time and again. I think we talked about this the other day as, I had a young man come up to me several years ago, and he said, I don't know if you remember me. I took Intro to Roasting Concepts or Profile Roasting or something along those lines with you years ago in Atlanta. And he handed me a bag of coffee. And he said, this is my brand. And this is what I use to feed my family. This is my living. And you helped me learn how to do that. That's when you feel like you've had the ability to give back some of what you were given. Mm-hmm. So it's not so much about feeling like you know something or you're that. It's about when you realize that you've been able to actually share that and somebody else gets it. And I turn to that person. I'm like, make sure you teach somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. When you realize you've had an impact on other people's lives, I mean, that you act, because you do it all the time. I'm positive of that, but to have it actually told to you and you seeing that and realizing it. Yeah. I love that. So so there was a moment, and you had shared this with me, and again, I'd love for you to share it here, is, there was a moment when you were given something, you were handed something that you have a collection, but what that meant to you. I'd love for you to share what that is and
Sure.
And how it occurred.
I collect cupping spoons. I have kind of I have a chest that your normal silverware that you'd get as a wedding gift. I have one of those filled up with cupping spoons. And, and sensory is such a huge part of what we do. And it's such a huge part of our analysis. And that's why they kind of go hand in hand. That's why I really encourage people to learn more. The disciplines within the SCA and the education today, there's 5 disciplines. And for all roasters, I suggest them they approach all of them. But sensory has been a huge part for me. And so cupping spoons are a big thing. And I love our history. I love our founders and the folks that came before us. And I was... when the SCAA first started, Ted Lingle, who was the first president, huge part of our history. Ted was in India and had about 24 of these spoons made, and they're hand hammered. This is made in India and it says SCAA, and it's a silver plated spoon. And these were like the holy grail of cupping spoons. and they were, I had heard about them, and, Ted had one, and I was getting ready to go up and lecture with Carl Schmidt, who was one of my heroes and one of my mentors. He was the principal at Probot for many years, a wonderful instructor, great educator. And I was getting ready to go up and give this very serious lecture with him on the art and science of chemistry, or the art and chemistry of roasting. It's just, very dry, but, kind of important. And at the time, the chair of the Roasters Guild was Jen Apodaca, and she walked up to me and she said, she worked at Royal, and she said, this came across, in a drawer somewhere, and I looked at it and I realized, hey, this needs to go live with you. And she handed it to me. It was like, it was this weird emotional moment, like, oh my God, this is a piece of our history.
Yeah.
And now I need to go and talk about this really dry subject. So she totally dropped me off the cart there, but I care about that. And one of the things I try and do when I teach is I try and make sure that people understand that none of this is me. This is stuff that I was able to experience and learn because other people were kind enough to show me things. And that hopefully when they learn a little something, if they sit in a class and I, spit something out and they realize, oh, that's kind of cool, and they write it down, they teach it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. That's how, even if it's a customer, if you just talk to customers, if you're in a small retail operation, you give them that time. They see that you care, and that builds it goes back to the small cafe principles.
Right. Yeah. No, you're spot on. So and you've given, so much back to the industry, and it's fabulous. And if I could sit there and pick your brain on coffee roasting with me being at the beginning of my journey, I will, I will be sure to do that. Okay, so I want to jump over to Starbucks and just some stats, even in the industry a little bit, because I saw some interesting ones, which I think, I visited the first Starbucks, cafe, and there's so much history there. Flagship. And you look at where they were, how they started, and where they are today. It's fascinating. So I read that there's the largest roasting facility is in Pennsylvania, where you are at, 1,079,000 square feet. I can't even, to be honest, comprehend that. And then Starbucks produces over 250 million pounds of coffee per year across all facilities, right? I mean, So can you share like one other, whether it's about Starbucks or just a general coffee industry stat that to you is a big number?
I'm part of, I when I was at Green Mountain, which morphed into Keurig, we went through a series of mergers, and business is always messy and things fall off the table. And I left there, and then I had an opportunity to spend time in leadership as director of roasting at West Rock, and leadership was a little different gear for me, and I wanted to return to being involved with the roasting a little bit more hands-on. And I came to Starbucks, and I'm part of a team and I like the idea of being a part of a team, because I sit in a room with 6 other people who are incredible roasters, and we're all roasting on 360 kilo machines. And so a Zen moment for me, or a Zen night for me, is if I roast 60 cycles of coffee, the same coffee, and we have our stat for where the color should be. And I've noticed that we have, our things we're checking to make sure that our profile is right. And over 60 cycles, I have less than a point of deviation in color at the end of the night from the first one to the 60th. To me, I walk out of work thinking, I've produced this much coffee tonight with my team, and they've all done something very similar. And when I walk into a store and I pick up a bag and I see where it's from, I know the quality that went into that. And it's exactly the same thing as when I was roasting on a 7 kilo machine.
That's
what
incredible.
It's about. That's what it's about.
Yeah. But that number, I can't help it, Jim. That number, 60 cycles. I mean, that ultimately equates to 60,000 pounds in one night, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Close to it. It's all relative. And one of the reasons I chose to come to Starbucks was it really is like the last great coffee company. I mean, the amount of care that goes into it, we don't have employees, we have partners. And I say that because the 6 other people that sit in the room with me have the same passion, same interest, and we care for each other. We help each other produce that, because when we go into a store and we see someone pick up a bag, there's pride. You feel like you're a part of it. It comes back to the Civets quote. We're there to make people happy.
Right. Well, and Starbucks has played such an important role. You and I spoke a little bit about this, call it the third wave of existence, right? And they played such an important role in sort of, I don't know, re-sparking the interest in specialty coffee. But today, Starbucks is what percentage of the specialty coffee industry?
I think in the NCA, another great organization, the NCA, their report last year, I want to say that Starbucks was in and around 41% of the coffee that's roasted in the specialty coffee industry comes from Starbucks.
That is huge.
The building I'm fortunate enough to work in, we do about 140 million out of that building. And it's care. It's the third wave, it's a side conversation always at events, most of this wave of new cafes and the entire industry kind of owe their existence to Starbucks, because the awareness that the rest of the world has had over what great coffee is because Starbucks grew the way it did.
Right.
And Starbucks grew in a way with quality being a part of it. There were no corners cut. The same quality that went in when they were roasting, in Seattle on a 60-kilo machine is what we do today in 5 different roasting facilities around the United States.
So one thing I think that Starbucks did right, like really did well, is listening to what the customer wants, and really paying attention to, what Americans drink, what they want to drink. So major kudos to them, because I'm a firm believer in always listening to your customer, having that two-way dialogue and. But I also read an article around bridging the gap between the specialty coffee industry and what many industry professionals view as a quality cup, versus what the end customer may view as an end quality cup as well. And so that there's this whole, I don't know, I'll call it an undercurrent of trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. How do you think that we need to, what do we need to do as an industry to help bridge that gap? I think Starbucks nailed it, right? It's like, how do we, as an industry though, and I don't know, for lack of a better word, follow suit in closing that gap?
One of the great roasters throughout our history is a gentleman named Neil Wilson. Neil's at Wilson's Coffees and Teas in Racine, Wisconsin. Neil is one of the most gifted and intelligent roasters I know. And I get coffee from him regularly. But Neil has this passion for darker coffee, and the industry as a whole has moved to a much lighter result, which is part of that technology driving that, realizing that the amount of acidity and the sweetness that you can get from a lighter cup, but yet we're losing that dark, rich, that point where the fine line between caramelization and carbonization. There is that beauty of the darkness. Neil recently went through and redesigned the entire profile roasting platform so that you could maintain and control those aspects. That's listening. There are customers that really like a light roast coffee, really do. But the Pacific Northwest developed this darker profile, and that's what Starbucks grew out of. And you look and say the paradigm of the fact that Green Mountain and Keurig were based on the East Coast. So both of them were equally successful, but they had very different products, and they were meeting customers' needs. And how they evolved, and they're two perfect examples, is how we as an industry evolve and should continue to. Let's not have disdain towards dark or light. Let's offer them both. Let's offer, I mean, that's one of the neat things about the way coffee and crops work, and the whole harvest process is you can roast a Brazilian coffee, to a 54 Agtron and get a really nice, wonderful cup. It's going to be bright. It's going to be acidic. You can take that same Brazilian coffee and you can roast it to a 32 and get that really good caramelization and that smokiness and the roughness to it. And here's an even crazier idea. Mix those two together. Same origin, you can do it. So it's listening to what your customers want. It's listening to the industry. Because again, it's about we're making them happy. And it's a privilege to do that. It really is a privilege to be able to do something that at the end of your day, you are making someone happy. That's why I'm not a repo man.
Well, coffee has certainly brought me a lot of joy for many, many, many years. In decades, I can speak. Okay, so we are running out of time, so I want to quickly ask you a couple very brief questions. It is the U3 top 3 brief answers, brief one-word answers or phrases. Your favorite brewing method, Jim?
I like Chemex a lot. It depends. It really depends on the coffee, but I like Chemex a lot. Mike Ebert, who is was a past president of the SCAA, and he and his wife are the principals for Fire Dancer Coffee. Great educators, great consultants. Mike taught me 20 years ago how to brew on a Chemex, and there's this romance to it of watching it and the bloom and the whole process. I just love a Chemex. But having been a Keurig roaster for many, many years, I was a part of the team when we were developing the organic Sumatran. And I still have a Keurig brewer in my home, and I'll have one of those occasionally. It depends on, kind of the mood, but probably my favorite is I love a Chemex. It's just dripping with romance.
I would have to agree on the romance of it for sure.
It's like a lever espresso machine. Gaj's in New York is like the original, and I've been there and I've pulled a shot. There's just something that process is just like, we get to do that.
Yeah, there's a beauty. There's a beauty in it for sure. Okay, for consumption, like the coffee drink of choice or type of coffee, type of beans, whatever your drink of choice is.
Well, black. Black.
Mine too.
Yeah. Again, great crops. What's in season? What's an interesting harvest? I like, I'm a big fan of Indos. I really like Indos. I'm a huge fan of Sumatran, great Sumatrans. I love a good Sulawesi. Celebes is a wonderful place. I want to visit there. I like a good espresso. I like an Italian espresso. I had the privilege of knowing Ernesto Ely, and I had the opportunity to know a little bit about what went into an Italian espresso and what went into a crema and what you were trying to do with that balanced drink. A good espresso. I love a great ristretto. Those are just kind of the things. But probably an Indo is my go-to coffee. Neil recently sent me a great Indian coffee that was just off the hook great.
I got to meet Neil. I totally got to meet Neil. I'm from Wisconsin. He's living in Wisconsin.
Go see him.
Yeah, I'm doing it. I'm writing that one down. Okay, how many cups of coffee do you drink per day, Jim?
Oh, I don't know. I'm kind of impervious to caffeine. 4 or 5, maybe.
Okay.
I probably have 2 cups of coffee in the morning. I go to work. I work 3 to 11 East Coast time. So, I'll drink a cup of coffee or so at work, with my team. And we do sensory panels. So I'm drinking coffee at work like that as well. So,
sure. So are you Gen Xer? Are you a Gen Xer? Baby boomer?
Yeah.
Gen Xer.
68. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
1968. I'm not 68. Yes.
Got it. I was going to say, you don't look 68. So you're like right in that 16% or so, doing, 4 to 5 cups. I do want to give you an opportunity to share where someone can learn more about you, because there is so much more that we didn't even get to, but want to give you the opportunity to put it out there.
I'm just, I'm on LinkedIn. People can find me there. I'm happy to help people just answer questions. I know some really great educators. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of them, and they invite me back to do that. And I'm happy to do that. One of the things you wrote earlier, was about a motto in life or anything like that. And on my business card, I have it's written Festina Lente, which is an old Italian commentary. And it's make haste slowly. And that's the idea. It was the original book mark or watermark from Aldus Manutius in 1501 when he printed the very first copies of the Dante's Inferno. And that's the concept of life is make haste slowly. Find a concept, agree with it, and support it wholeheartedly.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jim, and for helping us uniting the world through coffee. And thanks to you, our followers, for joining us at U3 Coffee. We'll see you next time.